Welcome to the Brute Strength Podcast, bringing you worldwide experts from all areas of health and fitness. We cover training, nutrition, coaching, and mindset. Welcome your host, strength and conditioning coach, 2012 and 2013 CrossFit Games champ, Michael Cazayoux. Mind, body, brute.
Hey, before we start this show, I want to let you know about something I'm super pumped about right now, which is that I started a second podcast. It's called the WAG Podcast, and I do it with my wife, Dean Somerset. And the reason that we started this second show is because over the past few years, I've had the opportunity to interview some of the best and brightest in the health and fitness space, from New York Times bestselling authors to Olympians and CrossFit Games athletes to NFL coaches to sports psychologists, you name it, a lot of the best and the brightest. And I have also interviewed my wife, Dean, 6 or 7 times. And without fail, the episodes that get the most engagement in terms of direct messages or mentions on social media or emails are all the ones that I do with her. And I think it has something to do with the authenticity of the conversations, the fact that we know each other a little bit better and can pull stories out of the other. And so we decided that we were going to start a second show, and the format is each episode is 20 to 30 minutes on a single topic with actionable steps after each. We talk about nutrition, personal development, mindset, and fitness. And so far, the response has been incredible. So if you're interested in the conversations that we've had on this show, I know you will love that one. So go check it out. Let me know what you think. Let's get into this episode. Hello, and welcome back. This is Michael Cazayoux, and you're listening to the Brute Strength Podcast. This week, I am joined by Dean Somerset. Dean is one of the world's foremost leaders in strength and conditioning in the private sector. He is a personal trainer. He is a certified exercise physiologist. He's a writer and author and has been seen in some big time online platforms and magazines like T Nation, bodybuilding.com, and Men's Health. This is one of the widest ranging, in terms of topics, widest ranging podcasts that I've ever done. We started out talking about how he went from having no confidence at all as a strength and conditioning coach and thinking he would suck to becoming one of the best in the world and how he's done that. We talk a lot about building other skills outside of just kinesiology and exercise science, such as empathy, mental models for seeing the world through and making better decisions. So a mental model is sort of the filter through which you look at the world. And mine, for instance, is usually in terms of psychology. I tend to see all things in terms of psychology. So having more mental models can help you make better decisions and navigate through the world a little more effectively. We discuss if marketing and selling yourself is evil or not. And one of the things that I really love about Dean is his ability to be so focused on his craft, but also so open-minded to learning and mastering other skills outside of just exercise science. We talk about resilience in the body, building habits, and of course, pushing a cart full of baby dolphins off of a cliff. There's a good story there. Why stretching is bullshit, and finally, artificial intelligence. We talk about how we might see AI in the fitness industry as well as sort of the implications outside of it. So again, Dean is a phenomenal thought leader in strength and conditioning, and one of the biggest things that I love about him is his willingness to learn about a wide range of topics. So I think it's something that all of us can learn a lot from. So without further ado, please welcome Dean Somerset. Dean, what's up, brother? Thanks for joining me today, man.
Happy to be here, dude. Let's light this candle up.
So obviously we're going to talk all about strength and conditioning. You're one of the world's foremost thought leaders in this industry. But I think we should probably start out with something even more important, which is professional wrestling. You have a deep love for wrestling, and I quote, "You think it's infinitely better than any other form of entertainment." Talk to me about this.
That's the fun thing about wrestling is it's everything you would want it to be and then some. So like they purposely make it so broad of appeal. You can have the really intense matches. You can have the really slapstick comedy type matches. They'll have running storylines. The cool thing is that with the way that a lot of wrestling shows are set up with the on stage and then behind camera or behind stage elements, there's only one other TV show that shares that approach, and that's the Muppets. So when you see the on stage, behind stage elements that they involve, no other form of entertainment has that availability to it other than Jim Henson's creations from this Creature Shop. So when you see real human beings going through body slamming, throwing each other around in backstage areas and then doing the same thing in front and then trying to make it entertaining for people, it's pretty amazing. Plus you get into things like storytelling through action. It's pretty cool to be able to see it when it actually is done well. When it's done poorly, you look at it and it's like, no, not so much. But really well done pro wrestling lights you up like nothing else.
So I feel similarly about Harry Potter. I feel like that's the best form of entertainment ever made. However, I grew up basically with Harry, right? Like I was the same age as him in the book. And so I feel like a lot of people, if I tell them, especially older people, if I tell them to go read Harry Potter, they don't have that same experience. And I'm wondering if that plays a role for you with wrestling. Like, did you fall in love with it as you were kind of growing up?
Yeah, I mean, I was watching it when I was kind of going through a couple of different phases. So there was the Hulk Hogan era, and then into the Attitude Era, which is where like Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, and like the more current era, which is kind of like the reality version of it, where people are breaking down the walls and getting rid of like the imagination element of it and saying, well, we're real people, so here's how we want to view it, and almost breaking down the fourth wall of the actual wrestling personas themselves. So yeah, I kind of grew up with it, but you can't beat a good Macho Man promo. You can't beat The Rock as far as like in-ring energy and bringing 30,000 people to their feet and just screaming frenzy. That's pretty amazing to be able to see.
I love that too, man. Have you ever done any like, quote unquote professional wrestling or like amateur wrestling?
Not directly. I mean, my athletic background's pretty limited, but I thought I was a good athlete, so I would try really hard, but I was never good at anything, and I was really good at getting injured more than anything else. So I stayed away from the stuff where I'm like, I'm probably going to break myself.
Yeah.
So things like amateur wrestling, I knew I would be really bad at, and pro wrestling, it's better to watch than to do, at least for me anyway. But it's really cool to be able to see. However, I have been close enough to observe Triple H go through a workout with Joe DeFranco as he was getting ready for WrestleMania and chat with him about it and see what he goes through and what his actual days are like. So that was as close as I've gotten to it.
So you put that in the Man Crush Spank Bank.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I just came up with that. I actually like that a lot. Yeah, I got a really unique opportunity. We did this fundraiser for kids with Down syndrome in conjunction with some amateur wrestlers. And me and a buddy got to do a tag team event with some of them. And when we were practicing, it was it felt so weird because there was no structure, no direction to this like practice session. So we were kind of laughing and joking around. They did not like that. This is like life or death situation right here. They did not like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's ways of doing it where you're safe, and there's ways of doing it where you're going to kill the other person that you're working with. So, yeah.
I don't think that was it. I don't think they were worried about our safety. I think they thought we weren't taking their discipline serious enough.
I got you.
Which I can see.
Yeah.
All right, brother. Let's get into this, man. So in researching you, I know you've been really forthcoming about the fact that when you first started out, you figured you would suck as a strength and conditioning coach, and it really messed with your confidence and motivation. And now you're this world-renowned strength and conditioning coach. You've got seminars that you're doing all around the world. You're working with people in person as well as online all around the world. So tell me a little bit about what it was like when you were starting out and a little bit about your evolution as a strength and conditioning coach.
Well, I do appreciate the kind words, but I still suck as a strength coach. So I'm still trying to figure out what I'm actually good at. The best thing that I probably did was just be completely stubborn and pig-headed about progress. So just trying to find ways to stumble forward as much as possible. When I first started out, it was before the internet had Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. So if a trainer wanted to learn more about stuff, they had to go to conferences, they had to go to a couple of specialty websites. There wasn't as much easily available information as there is today, but that also meant that there wasn't as much stuff or static out there that could distract trainers or make them think wrong things or put them into the incorrect paths. So there was more of a chance for self-discovery versus guided discovery from others. So with a lot of the work that I was doing, I asked questions and I tried to find people who knew the answers. So I spent probably the first 5 years of my career trying to shadow as many professionals as possible, and a lot of it local, because being a young strength coach, I didn't have money for travel. And if you've ever been to Edmonton, it's in the middle of nowhere. And trying to travel from Edmonton is completely ridiculous as far as costs go. So I was finding physiotherapists, chiropractors, other trainers, whoever would be willing to let me look over their shoulder for a couple of hours and ask questions and say, how are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And what about if this worked? And just trying to ask questions and learn as much as I could from people who were good at what they were doing. So that was the basis of my early education, on top of a degree and certifications and trying to attend a conference here and there.
People reach out to me all the time and ask me what books that I would most recommend for different topics. And I'll always give them some book recommendations depending on what they're looking to learn. But I have this standard response, and I'm curious how this jives with your experience. I have this standard response that I send people where I tell them, look, reading is a phenomenal way of learning, and it's one of the things that one of the forms of education I value most. But here's how I look at education in terms of a hierarchy. I think that the absolute fastest way to learn is surrounding yourself with people that have already made the mistakes that you've made, that are where you want to be. So you already mentioned, shadowing physios and different experts. So that would be the top layer. The second one would be in-person conferences and seminars, and then down the line are like courses and then books. How does that jive with your experience?
Well, the ways that people tend to learn are through tactile, audio, and visual. So you can see and do something, and that usually makes people learn something more effectively. You can show them how to do it, which helps them to learn well, but not as well as them doing it. And then you can either talk about it or write about it, which is kind of the least effective form of people learning stuff. Mm-hmm. So in order to get people to learn the most effectively, get them to do it. Mm. That's going to be where the key phases of actual learning come into play. So if you're just reading, you're only accepting that visual element of things, or the visual audio kind of thing. So you're not really being able to retain as much information as you should be. So I actually saw a study a little while ago that compared reading to listening. So if you're listening to information on an audiobook or like a podcast, you're going to retain half as much as if you were to read it. Mm-hmm. If you were to actually go out and do stuff, you retain about 2 to 3 times as much as what you read. So doing things is way more valuable than reading about it or listening about it.
And then teaching it is a form of doing. I've heard when you teach something is activated. I think it's something like the transformance drive. Have you heard of this?
No.
Something like your transformance drive is activated, and that's why it's more effective to learn that way. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I mean, from teaching, what I've been able to find is that you have to essentially create a story and then craft an experience for the person in front of you. Mm-hmm. So you can relay facts and information and all that kind of stuff. But as a teacher, you have to be able to make sure that when that person leaves the room, they remember something. Mm-hmm. So it's not a matter of saying, well, here's all the facts, here's all the stats. Now, what did you learn afterwards? And they're like, I don't know. I can't remember any of it. If I was to lay out a workshop and say, I want these people to retain 3 important key features, how am I going to lay out my content so that they remember those 3 key features?
Right.
So if I have a full day workshop, if I have a 2-hour workshop or a 1-hour workshop at a conference, how do I relay the information that I want that's going to make it so that every single person in that room leaves saying the same 3 things? Mm-hmm. As a teacher, that becomes the challenge, is being able to say, how do I craft the experience, the story, and make it something so that the people in front of me can actually leave saying, I got it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the reasons that I say when people ask me about programming, it's like, here are all of these books and seminars, but get out there and start actually programming for people, teaching these things, and you are going to be your biggest teacher in the long run.
Yep. And also part of it is track data. It's like, seriously, there's so many times where you can give a client a program and then be like, all right, did that work? And the trainer is just like a shrug emoji.
Mm-hmm.
But you have a measurable, quantifiable data set that you want to utilize and be able to see change. Do a pre-post measurement on any program that you use. And if it works, great. You've got a data set and that just taught you something that you're probably going to remember. I mean, if I want my clients to get stronger, 3x8 of a squat is probably not going to put as much weight on the bar as 5x3.
Mm-hmm.
Just due to the fact that they're using a different loading capacity. So if I do a test before and after and I see that the numbers went up significantly, okay, that program worked at what I was trying to do. So do some data collection, do some testing, and figure out what works.
Yeah, and there's a difference in what you remember by taking a client through an 8-week program versus just reading about a bunch of different set rep protocols in a book.
Absolutely.
So on your website, I want to read a little bit about your website because it's hilarious, and it's so surprising that it's coming out of someone from Edmonton of all places. So on the very top it says, "I know, right? You do look exceptionally good today. Are those new pants? No pants? Well, you smell terrific. So you have that going for you. Give yourself a high five." And then somewhere at the bottom of, I think, the homepage, it's, "If I can be of any service to you in the future, maybe freshen your drink, fluff your pillow, show a new deadlift stance that might work for you, anything at all, just let me know by emailing me here. I check my email every day." I love it, dude. It kind of reminds me of John Romanello. You know that guy?
Yeah.
His site is hilarious. Anyway, where'd you learn to write, man? And why don't you write like all of the other boring strength coaches out there?
Well, I don't know if I necessarily learned to write in one specific area. I've always been interested in reading literature. Writing was always kind of an easy subject when I was going through school. When I was in my mid-20s, I got kind of bored and I thought, maybe I'll try and challenge the MCAT exam, see if I can get into medical school. So I studied for that for about 6 months. And the funny thing about doctors is they need to know how to chemistry. And I don't
need to know how to chemistry. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I took the exam, it's broken down into 3 different sections. There's the physical sciences, there's the biological sciences, and then there's a writing sample. I bombed out hard on the physical sciences. So I think I got like in the lowest 20th percentile, but I got in the top 5% on the writing sample internationally. So that kind of taught me, well, okay, I know a little bit about writing. Maybe being a doctor is not the right thing to do. So maybe I should pursue writing more. And that was kind of the genesis of the blog in itself. So I've always been of the belief that it's easier to keep somebody's attention if you entertain them than to just provide information. So that's why I throw in jokes and weird pop slogan sayings and stuff like that to keep the reader's attention so that I can get to the information that they need. There's the old saying that people buy the steak, but they pay for the sizzle. So if I'm actually willing to provide both the steak and the sizzle, they'll pay for that, and they'll also be able to show up and continue reading. If I can keep somebody's attention, eyeballs are worth their weight in gold in today's economy, just due to the fact that there's so many competing attention whores out there. So if I can be the biggest attention whore just by making people laugh a little bit or see something and say, okay, I remember that, then my job is done. I mean, I'm not going to be doing butt selfies on Instagram or anything like that, but I do have a good
Don't
butt.
Count yourself out, brother. I peeped you. I peeped your site.
My angling game isn't quite that strong. I gotta get some Gymshark.
Yeah.
That, right?
Hey, it's just a skill like anything else, man. You decide you want to learn it, you got it.
You know, I got to take 500 pictures, delete the ones that aren't good, crop them out, do some airbrushing. I'll find a way.
There you go. Yeah, for those of you who are interested in this sort of writing, I follow this guy named Ben. I think it's Ben Settles, and he has this a monthly copywriting newsletter. And his whole thing is called infotainment. So mixing education with entertainment, which is what Dean is talking about. He is a hilarious writer, and he teaches you how to use those methods. I I've really gotten away from that in the past couple of years, but talking to you right now is kind of reinvigorating, because you're exactly right. People pay for that experience, not just the learning, right? All of this information is already out there somewhere. And so we have to have a way to differentiate ourselves and to make it truly valuable for people.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's the easiest way to make it so that people, for one, want to click on your link, is when they think, oh, cool, this is exciting, this is going to be awesome.
Right.
But it's also a matter of saying, oh, well, the information that you're delivering is still high quality. I'm a firm believer that everyone who is trying to be a content creator has to be a bit of a mix of P.T. Barnum and Albert Einstein. You have to know what you're talking about, but then you also have to deliver it in an exceptionally entrapping manner to get people to actually pay attention to you.
Very well put.
If someone wants to learn how to write, craft stories, do anything like that, study two different types of entertainers: stand-up comics and wrestlers cutting promos.
Love it, man. So this is exactly what I love about you most, is this. So a problem I see with a lot of traditional strength and conditioning coaches is that they have this attitude that all they're going to focus on is their craft. And if they're good enough, people will find them and they're going to be successful. Unfortunately, the world doesn't work that way, right? It seems like what you've been able to do in your career is focus very deeply on the craft of strength and conditioning, but you're also humble enough to learn about copywriting, about web design, about building web pages. Where does this humility and open-mindedness come from? And just talk about, let's start there. Where does the open-mindedness come from?
Well, I mean, part of it comes from the fact that, I don't know everything. And if there's something out there to learn that can make me better, cool. I'm still young enough where I can say I'm not an old dog. I'm getting up there, but I can still learn a new trick. So one of my big things that I wanted to focus on this year was being able to build websites and build my own, I guess, structure for upcoming products on my own without having to outsource that. So that's been a learning curve, trying to figure out all the steps necessary for that. But I figured that if I'm paying somebody else to do it, they obviously know how, so I should be able to learn how as well. I mean, it's not like chemistry where I have no clue or no chance whatsoever. But if I can figure out the basis on something like a web design, that's going to save me money down the road. And it's going to make it something where I'm in more control over it, and I can figure out what to do with it and adjust it, and not have to wait 2 weeks for tech support to get back to me to figure that kind of stuff out.
Right.
So, in a lot of ways, it's self-serving because it's making me more autonomous in what I'm doing. But at the same time, it's that learning process to be able to say, well, it's just a part that builds into everything else that I'm doing. So it's not something where I'm trying to make it like I'm leveling up or becoming more dominant in the world or anything like that. I'm just trying to figure out how to do basic stuff like websites, so that I can actually figure out how to make things work if something breaks or if an update happens. And also it's a cost saving measure where I can, not pay a web design person $10,000 or $20,000 to build a website for me if I can do it on my own.
Right.
So a lot of the humility comes into how I was brought up in a family of mechanics, where they're like, okay, something's broken, go fix it.
Yep.
Figure out what's broken and then figure out a way to make it work, and then you do it yourself. It wasn't a matter of, oh, well, you're awesome or you're not good enough. It was just, okay, well, here's the problem, now figure out the solution.
So I think that this way of going about things is not only good for solopreneurs or freelancers, or just like a solo fitness trainer or strength and conditioning coach, but also for a leader of large organizations. Because as you grow, you need the ability to lead people in a wide range of different disciplines. And so by having this breadth of knowledge and experience, if you should choose to grow and build a company where you've got, experts in different areas, you speak the language already. You know how long things should take, how to support them. And one of the mistakes I think I made early on in my career was delegating too quickly and not really getting in the weeds enough on some of these things. So much admiration to you, man. I love it.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm a firm believer that delegation helps to free you up, but at the same time, you should know what should be happening when you delegate.
Yep.
There's a time and place for everything. And I mean, I'm not going to I haven't worked on a car in probably 20 years. So if the way that a lot of cars are set up now, if they're carbureted or fuel injected or computer controlled, I'm not going to have any idea what to do on that. So I'm going to actually send it out to the mechanic and say, okay, well, I don't know what's happening. Can you fix it? Rather than me spending the time and energy to go through that kind of stuff. But for something like a website, that's kind of right into that sphere of control that I have the ability to look into. So yeah, cool. I'll be doing that kind of stuff. I would delegate the stuff that I don't know how to do immediately because I don't want to try and spend the time figuring that out and screw it up and do whatever. But I've been using the internet and website stuff for about 10 years, so I've got basic understanding of it. So this was more just about expanding my understanding of what I currently have.
Right.
Stuff like where I have no clue and I have no training, no tools, none of that kind of stuff, I'll offload that pretty immediately.
What other skills that you've learned have been most impactful for you outside of what is typically thought of in terms of strength and conditioning?
Probably empathy. I mean, that's something that reaches everyone one way or another. So when I was first going through my degree, I worked in a cancer research facility that was dealing a lot with exercise trials. And you can't help but empathize with somebody who's going through cancer treatment, especially when they're in like stage 4 terminal palliative care. But at the same time, I've never gone through that myself. But you just have to feel for what the person's going through and understand, put yourself into their shoes as best as possible and say, okay, well, how can I help this person in a better way? So online, the internet's a terrible place some days where you get into a lot of really nasty discussions and ad hominems. But if you look at what somebody's saying, if they're coming from a place of truly wanting to understand, putting them down is probably not the best thing to do. If you can understand that where they're coming from may not be from the same place that you are, whether that's a place of privilege or a place of ineptitude, whatever, and then try to reach them on a level where you can communicate with them, that goes a long way to building that interpersonal relationship with somebody who may down the line become a customer, may down the line be a client, or may down the line be somebody who's willing to say, you know, he's a smart guy, he does a really good job, but I really like the way he interacted with me. I mean, I'm sure we all know people who are incredibly brilliant, but online they're complete a-holes and nobody wants to deal with them in person just because they shut the door on themselves.
Right.
So one thing to know what you're talking about, but then it's another thing to, you know, try to score points for digs and slams and stuff against other people to the point where you paint yourself into a corner.
Have there been any useful resources or experiences that have made you more empathetic, or is it just this realization that being more empathetic can be useful to you?
Well, I mean, every experience gives you a chance to learn. So, I mean, working with people with cancer is one, working with people who are going through or who have gone through joint replacements or spine surgeries or anything where you're working with somebody who's in a pain or a chronic pain management sense. You learn a lot about empathy and you learn about reaching people where they are. Pretty much every interaction that you have is a chance to do something to help somebody. I'm a big believer that every trainer should have a service industry type job too. So whether you're working as a bartender or working as a night manager at a hotel or anything where you're helping people directly, just learning how to connect with them, be empathetic, and just be service oriented. I mean, training is a service job. So you have to reach people where they are and be willing to accommodate and be willing to find solutions for them that work for them, especially in situations where communication may be altered or not the best. So helping people out in the service industry would probably be the best way.
Yeah, it's also a very humbling experience, right? You're kind of, you have to do their bidding, right? If you're a bartender or a waiter or waitress, you have to kind of be their bitch for a little bit. And that's probably a good experience for just about anyone.
Yeah, I would rather say that it's something where you have to kind of understand what they're asking and then meet their demand. So a lot of the time it's not necessarily being their bitch. It's more about saying, okay, well, how can I help this person in a way that exceeds their request or exceeds their expectation? So if somebody comes to the counter and says, make me a drink, okay, well, let's find out what kind of drink you want and what would be open and then try to wow them as you go through the process rather than beer it is. Boom, here you go.
Love it. Yeah, and I hope I wasn't offensive to anyone out there. I had 3 or 4 bartender waiter jobs before strength and conditioning, and I felt like I was the bitch a lot of times. So I'm speaking on my own behalf. You put it much more elegantly.
Yeah, and I mean there are times where you just pretty much have to shut up and do the job, and that's part of the service industry is humbling yourself to be able to say you're not above the work that you do,
Right.
and being able to put out the effort to make sure the client or the customer is happy at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean it is a little bit of both sides. I mean you do have to do the work, but then sometimes you have to dig deeper and figure out how to do the work better for that person.
Mm-hmm. Have there been any other big skills that you've learned outside of strength and conditioning that have really helped your career?
Well, a lot of it comes back to the entertainment element of things too. So, like I was talking earlier, stand-up comedians and pro wrestling promos,
Mm-hmm.
learning how to deliver content with some level of excitement and learning how to put on a show can take you a long way. I mean, I'm more introverted by nature than extroverted. So when I'm working with clients all day long, I want to try to make sure that they feel like they're having an entertaining or at least a somewhat, emotionally good experience when they're in that session. So, singing off key, making freestyle raps about songs and then turning it into stuff about abs or squats or whatever, telling the odd joke, making sure that they can have fun makes a big difference in that client's enjoyment of the session and also makes them want to come back more. If you're a decent person to hang out with, people will want to hang out with you and likely pay you money to do the same thing.
Great advice, man. So along this same vein, a lot of strength and conditioning coaches, fitness coaches are either afraid of marketing themselves or they tell themselves that they don't need to or they shouldn't have to, right? If they're good enough, then people will find them. It seems like you've really broken out of that mold. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, marketing is essentially making sure that the message that you want to share gets heard by the people who you want to hear it. So when it comes down to marketing, there's two different ways of doing it. You can do a shotgun approach, which is try to get out in front of as many people as possible. But then there's also a sniper rifle approach, which is honing in on a specific type of person or specific goal set or specific verbiage or specific, pretty much as dialed in as you can possibly get, and making sure that the people who are coming to you are as high quality as possible in terms of converting them into a purchasing client or customer. So if you take a shotgun approach, you're reaching everyone, and you may get a conversion rate of like 0.01%, which means that you're wasting 99.99% of your effort. Or you could have a more targeted approach, which takes more time and effort, but might have a conversion rate of 30 to 40%.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on how you approach it. Now, there's also ways of approaching it where you're being very hyperbolic, where you're trying to really pump up what you do and what you say. And then there's a more honest method of doing marketing where you're able to say, here's what I do, here's what I can get you, can I help you out? And that's kind of where I align myself with more. And it's not necessarily saying one is better than another. It's just saying that's where I line up. Mm-hmm. So you can look at the marketing that I put out and be able to say, that's honest, that's who I am, that's who I speak for, and that's what I speak about. Then I can sleep well at the end of the night. And people aren't really going to call me out on anything because I'm being as honest as I possibly can. And if I'm being honest, that's essentially what people are going to see and what people are going to be driven towards.
Yeah, I like the metaphor of shotgun versus sniper. Seth Godin, one of the best marketers of all time, is a big proponent of this. So the traditional form of marketing is, big advertisements on the side of the road or TV ads where you're just trying to capture as much attention as possible, but it's very watered down. And more and more, we're coming into a space where we can get incredibly targeted with who we want to work with. And so it makes a lot of sense to decide who is my ideal person to work with, to coach. What person really lights me up? Who gets the best results? Who do I want to spend my time with? And then focus all of your attention speaking to that demographic. So then you end up attracting only the people that you want in your life, and you can be very, very specific with the wording you use and the communication that you use.
Yep. And I mean, there was a story I remember reading a while ago. It was in a book. I can't remember the name of it. I would do poor justice right now. But it was an individual and somebody else that were driving from the airport in San Francisco into town in San Francisco. And they see this big billboard on the side of the road that's all about like venture capitalists and like angel investing and everything like that. So it's on the way between the airport to San Francisco. And the guy looks and he's like, I don't even know what that ad is all about. And the guy in the car who's like a marketer or like a VCO, he looks back and he's like, that's not an ad for you. They were targeting specific people. Mm-hmm. No, those people were the ones who were coming between San Francisco and the city,
right,
and who looking for a venture capitalist or who might be looking for somebody to do a round of fundraising or get ready for an IPO or something like that. That's who they were targeting, and they set up advertisement in a specific position for those people, knowing that 99% of the people that drive by wouldn't have any interest in it whatsoever.
Right.
Now, also talking with a trainer who was setting up billboards on the side of a highway, talking about personal training services, and had a phone number on it and all his contact information, but he was getting frustrated because nobody was contacting him about it. It's like, okay, well, you're a personal trainer. It's a highway thing. If somebody's driving on the highway, are they going to pull over, stop, and then phone you from that billboard? Probably not. Are they going to contact you by email while they're driving? Probably not. They shouldn't anyway. So in terms of placement of that advertisement, it might not be well for the service that person's offering.
Right.
Somebody who's driving from the airport in San Francisco downtown and is looking for a VCO, they might actually be right into that because they might be getting somebody driving them in and see it, and they're like, okay, well, boom, 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 done. Rather than somebody who wants to lose 20 pounds who's driving themselves on the highway to work at 8 a.m, sees a billboard on the side of the road and is like, oh, I got to pull over, and then I got to write down that number, and then I got to call it, and then I'm going to be late for work. Placement plays a huge role in who you're actually going to attract, what your messaging is actually going to be about.
So I read one of your blog posts that you put out I think January 1st of last year. And it starts out, I had 0 clients. Now it's June of 2019. What happened?
Well, I moved. That was the big part. I went from a commercial gym where I was fairly successful to being an independent operator working out of a different facility. So when I left the commercial gym, I had 0 clients. So I just shut that area down and I moved over to a different environment, and then just started having my own gradual marketing to build things up in a new space. So yeah, January 1, 2018, I had 0 clients. And within about 3 months, I had 50.
So yeah, exactly. How did you do that? How did you go from 0 to 50 so quickly?
Well, part of it was just announcing I was in a different facility and different venue. So some people didn't like the commercial gym structure and didn't want to have a membership as well as training as well as everything like that. So they liked the freedom element of the new facility that I was operating out of. Plus, just being my own business, I had control over policies and procedures. So I could change things up on the fly if I needed to and make it more ameliorative to the client if I needed to. So not locking people into long-term contracts, not making it so that it's tough to be able to do stuff one way or another. Drop-in option was really a big thing for a lot of people versus having to pay for a membership. So as soon as I moved, people said, great, you're in a new space, I want to come see you. That made a big difference as far as getting new clients. So you never know how many people are actually watching what you do and waiting for your situation to line up with their situation.
Right. Wow. So you're really big on quote unquote hard work. I've seen you talk a lot about your 12 to 14 hour days, your 6 to 10 hour days on the weekends. But then on the other hand, I've also seen you kind of jokingly, like very, very good-hearted, like good-natured, jokingly talking about, people need to get a life. And so I'm wondering, how do you personally balance what sounds like an insane workload with quote unquote having a life?
Well, part of it is understanding that work-life balance doesn't exist. So if you're trying to achieve work-life balance, either you have a job that allows you to have a work-life balance, or the passion that you have for that job means that you're not quite to the point where you live it all day long. That's fine. You don't have to live it all day long. But if you're in a situation where you love what you do and you want to do it all the time, there is no work-life balance. So it's something where that is your identity and that is what you do all the time. And I'm pretty sure that if we were to look at 100 successful people in any field around the world, none of them have what we could classify as a work-life balance. They pretty much work 24/7, one way or another. So to be really, I guess you could say, good at what you do, you can't necessarily get there by putting in average workloads. If you put in average workloads, you're going to be average, because the way that people learn, experience, and grow is by doing stuff. So if you're only doing as much as everyone else, you're not growing at any exponential rate compared to anybody else. So if you look at anybody who's successful in strength training, I guarantee you they all put in about a decade or 2 decades of 12 to 16-hour days. And that's just not even something that you can really argue about. You can never really see a strength coach who becomes really considered high in their field by putting in 5 to 6 hours a day.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I've never heard of one. especially in the more public sector, right? The colleges and professional sports for sure.
Yep.
So where does the having a life part come in for you?
Part of it just comes into having enough interest in other stuff where you can hold a conversation with somebody about varied topics. Now, working with people all day long, I ask them questions. What are you interested in? What are you doing? Did you watch the game last night? What do you think? And that just builds up the ability to learn stuff. Because, I mean, I've got clients who are experts in what they do in a lot of different fields. So if I ask an accountant, hey, this new thing came out in Canada Revenue, which changed this. What do you think about that? What are going to be some of the implications? They can talk about that for hours, and I learn stuff about it, which means that then I can go to my next client and be like, oh, hey, one of my clients who's an accountant was saying this. Maybe try looking at contacting an accountant and doing this based on your situation. Or I can talk to a doctor who's an anesthesiologist about a hip replacement client that I had who wound up having an ostomy after their colon stopped working from their surgery. So they had to have an ostomy with a full resectioning of their colon, and say, how often does this actually happen? Well, with hips, it's more common than with knees, and it may be related to local versus general. Cool. Now I can talk to my other client about that kind of stuff. We can talk about Game of Thrones. We can talk about the basketball game. We can talk about hockey. We can talk about anything. But part of it is just having enough of a broad interest in other stuff where you can casually drop a reference here or there. I mean, one side is that now the population is getting a little bit younger and younger that I'm reaching, so I can't use Ace Ventura references as much as I used to because people were born after that movie came out. I mean, Tony Gentilcore and I, who teach Complete Shoulder and Hip Blueprint, we've got a slide in there that talks about Finkel and Einhorn. Half the room was born after that movie, so they don't get it. So we got to think, okay, do we keep that reference in there? Or do we just take it out and put something else in there? So having the diverse interests in movies, music, sports, other stuff leads into how well you can do your job.
Who is Warren Buffett's business partner? His name is slipping my mind right now.
I have no idea.
Charlie Munger. So Charlie Munger is huge on this. Charlie says, and for those of you who don't know, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger are two of the most, if not the most successful investors of all time. And he is huge on the idea of having many mental models when going through life. So most of us have like one or two mental models that we're filtering basically reality through. So mine, like my biggest passion is psychology. And so usually I'm seeing the world through like a psychological lens, right? When I'm looking at people and judging people, I'm kind of dissecting what's going on with their psychology. An economist might look at the world through more numbers. A physical therapist is looking at how people move and how that's affecting the way that they live and so forth. What I've noticed over time is that I feel like I get the most bang for my buck when I learn things outside of what I would normally learn. So learning about anthropology or biology or economics or something like that, I learned so much more than just staying in the same groove of like marketing and psychology and strength and conditioning, right? Does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. And I mean, to bring it back into strength and conditioning, you can talk about how athletes at any sport are encouraged to be multi-sport athletes. They're encouraged to not specialize early in any one specific sport, but to play a broad, diverse range of sports in order to encapsulate a greater motor program aptitude and greater transferability of skills from one sport to another. So if all you do is learn strength and conditioning research, you're going to be good at that one thing. But if you learn other stuff like music, art, psychology, interpersonal communication, you're going to be able to craft that information differently and mold it to the people who you're sitting in front of, but also be able to deliver it in a more entertaining and engaging way while also being able to tell the story that you want to tell more effectively. So in terms of how you learn the information you have, it relates almost directly towards motor programming in multi-sport athletes. More and broader interest makes you a better overall person.
Yeah, it allows you to explain what you know to a wider range of people, but also it gives you more tools in your toolbox, basically.
Yeah.
So I've got a number of, I think these all come from Instagram posts that I saw you put out. And the first is on resilience. And I fucking love this. So I'm going to read the whole thing because the whole thing is great. It goes, squatting with your knees past your toes won't make your knees explode. A weak VMO doesn't cause patellar tracking issues. A weak glute medius doesn't happen on its own and does cause valgus collapse. Creatine isn't a steroid and doesn't cause kidney failure. Tight hamstrings don't cause butt wink. The transverse abdominis shouldn't be trained in isolation, especially under load. All diets work if they create a caloric deficit. Sugar isn't toxic. In Family Matters, Judy Winslow went upstairs at the end of a season and was never seen again. I love that. Squat depth is irrelevant. Sumo isn't cheating. Now go train. You're more resilient than you've been led to believe. Amen, brother. Talk to me about that. Where did that come from?
Well, we see all the time about different, I guess you could say, boogeymen in fitness, where it's like, oh, you have this problem, blame this, or oh, you're not getting the result you want, blame this. Often that's not even the case. It's something where you can make a light correlative association towards it, but in terms of a causative relation, it's not really there. I mean, look at stuff like VMO weakness. The VMO doesn't pull on the tibia. It barely attaches to the patella directly. And a lot of the focus when you have patellar tracking is how the femur and the tibia line up. So great. How does the femur and the tibia line up and how does the VMO attach to that? Directly, it's not going to be the direct result of it. How your foot arch shape forms, how your ankle dorsiflexes and plantar flexes, how your adductor and IT band attach to the tibia and create that steering effect, how the femur rotates internal and external, none of that has anything to do with VMO. Glute med, if you got a weak glute med, can you have a strong glute max? Probably not. It's not going to happen just in isolation. If a diet creates caloric deficit, I don't care whether you're low carb, high carb, low fat, high fat. You created a caloric deficit, therefore you lose weight. Is it sustainable for you based on your lifestyle and your dietary preferences? Great. Do it and you'll lose weight. Everybody's happy. Judy Winslow went upstairs and you never saw her again. What the hell happened to Judy upstairs? And why aren't you talking about your second daughter? Like seriously, your second daughter vanished and you're not even worried about it. We got to send out a search party for Judy Winslow. Why is Urkel not getting to the bottom of this?
Amazing. A good buddy of mine, Andy Galpin, is a professor of kinesiology over at UC Fullerton, I believe it is. And he talks all about this. You know, they're so fickle and they just think that the smallest little things, right? Whether it be positive or negative, like this little supplement is going to be what takes them from good to great, or missing a workout is going to throw off their entire season, right? We are so much more resilient and our bodies do not pay attention to the minutia as much as we think they do.
Yeah. I mean, do you think human beings have gone through 4 billion years of evolution to get where we are by being thrown off by a big toe, like hammer toe, or a slight weakness in your glute med? Or do you think that we can really lift a mountain lion or woolly mammoth by doing a TVA brace? No, I mean, we've got to be able to do different stuff. I mean, we're one of the most adaptable species in the history of the world. So find a way.
Right.
Should be able to do it.
Yeah. The message for me is like, the goal is really just to have a plan and see yourself making progress. And then don't freak out about how quickly that happens. I think people really get attached to, you brought up the example of a weak glute med. That is just, that's such a hot topic. I don't know if it's still hot. It was hot 5 years ago, but everybody had a weak glute med and they blamed everything on it. Mm-hmm. Right. So if we can just identify some potential problems and see ourselves on the way of making progress, then we should just kind of let it go and just be assured that we're going to be okay.
Yeah. And I mean, what strengthens a weak glute med? Squats and deadlifts.
Yep.
What strengthens glute max? Squats and deadlifts. What are we going to do in our training? Squats and deadlifts.
So next,
I wish it could be more detailed than that, but it's like, okay, you have a weak muscle. Guess what's going to strengthen it? Loading. We need to make sure it's appropriate for the individual and make sure the volume is appropriate for the individual to what they can tolerate. But we're going to strengthen that weak muscle by loading it up. Mm-hmm. And then it's going to get stronger and it won't be weak anymore.
So on finding what works for you, you say, do what you can manage long term. If one diet averages a loss of 4% body fat and another a loss of 5.2% body fat, but you want to push a shopping cart full of baby dolphins off a cliff in protest, then which one's better? Can you talk about this a little bit?
Well, I'm sure we've all gone through or had somebody that we know who's gone through dieting for something like a figure competition or a bodybuilding competition. It's fairly extreme, and it's extreme for a reason because you're competing against other people who are doing very extreme dieting and trying to produce a specific result. If you've done that type of a diet before, you know how much it sucks, and you know how non-sustainable it is long term, because a lot of the time people have to take, reduced workloads at work, or they have to really up their training volume and intensity. So in terms of it being something where you can look at and say, okay, can you see yourself still doing this diet a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now? People look at you and say, no, this is until contest day, and then I'm going to face smash an entire cheesecake and bottle of bourbon because that's just what I want to do. So long term, no, it's not going to be something that's sustainable. If it's something that you barely even notice that you're doing, but it's producing results, that's long term sustainable.
I like that. Yeah. Barely even know you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big proponent of saying go for the low hanging fruit first. What's the stuff that you can do that'll move you in the right direction that doesn't even take effort? So if I have a client who's like, okay, I wake up in the morning, I have breakfast and blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay, well, what's the easiest way that we can move you in a healthy direction? How about with your breakfast, you have a tall glass of water? I'm not saying to take anything away, but you have a tall glass of water to make sure that you have hydration to get you through the day.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Easy. What about if instead of having 4 strips of bacon, you have 3? We're moving you in the right direction, but it's something that's so subtle you don't even notice it, but it's helping you to get that process where you're able to actually start seeing results.
Right.
And low-hanging fruit can fill up a basket pretty quickly. So if I get a client doing 3 or 4 things that they don't even take energy towards doing, and it makes enough of a difference, it puts them into a caloric deficit, they start losing weight, they start getting the results they're after, and they're like, wow, that was really easy. Why didn't I do this sooner? So at that point, then I'm winning versus saying, okay, well, we're going to do a complete 180 on your lifestyle. You now have to sleep 10 hours a day. You now have to eat keto. And I don't care if you don't digest well and you're sitting on the toilet for 7 hours a day, you're going to do this. And then we're going to add in max resistance training, German volume training. We're going to throw Fran on there on Thursdays. And then we're going to hopefully do 7 hours of cardio. That's going to be difficult for that client to do right off the bat.
Mm-hmm.
But if I say, I want you to go for a 10-minute walk after dinner, okay, that's easy enough to do. And that 10-minute walk adds up to 70 minutes in a week. So that's enough caloric intake where they're able to say, okay, that's a change from where they were before. And that's all we're trying to do is nudge people towards better. And if it's an easy nudge where they barely even notice it, they go along with it. But if it's a giant shove and they fall over as a result, it's not going to be a good day.
Right. Yeah. When we first start, like the goal is always to create habits, right? Create automated behaviors that we don't even have to think about or use any willpower to maintain. And when we start any new habit or take any new action, at first, everything is easy, right? We have all the motivation. We have, we just have all the motivation. We just experienced a lot of pain that makes us want to change, or we were inspired in some way. But after a few days, it starts to get difficult. And the bigger that changes from homeostasis, the more, one of my mentors calls it habit gravity, the more habit gravity you're going to experience, because your brain just wants to do what it's used to doing. And so it's going to start to resist, like actively resist continuing to do that thing. So if you can almost trick it and make it so that new action or habit is almost imperceptible, then you can start to build one small habit at a time. And if you're constantly doing that every 4 to 6 weeks, where would you be if you had one new habit every 4 to 6 weeks?
Yeah. Easy is easier than hard.
That's like what do they call it it's in like a koan. Like what's the sound of what is it? 2 hands clap? No, not 2. Well, 1 hand clapping. What's the sound of 1 hand clapping?
Yeah.
Wise words. Wise words. Yeah, there you go. So this one's on stretching. I know that you've changed your beliefs on stretching over the years. You used to stretch a lot of clients yourself, and now you prescribe it to almost no one. Why is that?
Primarily because it doesn't work. I mean, if we look at the research on it, static stretching in terms of increasing range of motion, no real benefit. Like no significant difference whatsoever as far as joint range of motions, muscle length, any of that kind of stuff. Injury prevention, no real benefit. Performance, no real benefit. So if there's no actual measurable, quantifiable benefit to a specific task, why do we want to keep doing it? Are there better ways of doing it? Yeah. I mean, we could do pre-contraction based stretching where you put the person into a range of motion and get them to contract agonist or antagonistic muscles. That actually produces a measurable result. And if I'm training people for results, that's the name of the game.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm trying to get somebody better active range of motion, if I'm trying to get somebody to regain range of motion following a joint replacement surgery or maintain strength through a range of motion, have more power coming out of the hole, I want to find ways that we can approach that without it being something where it's just time involvement that doesn't benefit anybody.
Right. So is there some nuance to this? Because there are a lot of people that do different forms of yoga, for instance, that have seen tremendous increases in range of motion, albeit very slowly.
Yep. So there's definitely nuance to everything. But if you take in yoga classes, you know that most of the positions that you get into aren't just hanging out in static stretch. You're usually using some form of balance or some form of controlled into that range of motion.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not something where you're just like grabbing your quad and stretching it back and doing like the classic runner stretch or sitting there and doing a hurdler's hamstring stretch. You know, those are cool things to do if they feel good for you and you enjoy doing them. But in terms of seeing the range of motion changes, when you look at what a yoga professional does, it's not just static stretching or partner assisted stretching.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something where yoga definitely has more nuance to it than just stretching. If you ask any yoga professional or yoga instructor and say, oh, well, is all you do just stretching? They'll look at you sideways and be like, child, we're going to get into something right now.
Right.
So yeah, it definitely involves more than just static stretching. So when you're looking at the benefits of yoga versus anything else, yeah, there are definitely some serious benefits to it. A lot of it comes back to control, active flexibility into range, but also breathing modulation. There's a huge component of breathing when it comes to stuff like yoga because of the impact that it has on mobility.
So what's the cutting edge? What are you doing with people to increase their mobility that's actually working?
A lot of it comes back to positional isometrics. So that seems to produce pretty rapid results and seems to produce more long-lasting results. So, I mean, you can call this, if you've taken the FRC course, PALS, rails, you can call it PNF stretching, you can call it isokinetics, you can, whatever you want to call it. But you put a person into a position, you say, okay, hang out there and now contract muscles and try to either pull yourself deeper into the position or push yourself out of the position. But when you're in that end range and you make muscles contract, there's actually clinical research on a lot of trials in meta-analysis states that are able to show that that produces a significant increase in range of motion with no real detriment to performance. So if I'm getting somebody to lift weights, great. Increase range of motion, no detriment to performance. We're good. Let's light it up. But if I do somebody or get somebody to do just a static stretch and hang out there, it might be easy and feel good, but it doesn't increase performance and it doesn't have as much of an impact on range of motion. Mm. Because most of the clinical trials out there show no significant difference whatsoever.
Right. So I know FRC does seminars all over the world. Are there any good online resources for this type of mobility work that people can look for?
I know Postural Restoration Institute has a home study myokinematics course, which is a lot about positioning, alignment, all that kind of stuff. I don't think it's directly related to the mobility element, but it has mobility elements built into it.
Got it.
So that'd be a good home study variation you could do. I also have a course called Ruthless Mobility on video, so digital download for that. I'm actually working on a new course called Scientific Basis of Mobility, and maybe down the road I'll record that, but we'll see where it goes.
Awesome, man. So I know you're starting to really dive into artificial intelligence. How do you think this is going to affect the fitness industry?
I think it's going to make most trainers out of work. So when you look at things like day trading or stock trading, AI mainframes have bases set up where it's like, okay, if the value goes up to here, then we buy or we sell. If the value goes down, we buy or we sell. And they can create all of the algorithms based on what the outcomes should be and where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't see it being too far of a stretch for somebody to purchase a training program and have an AI system set up where you enter in your vitals, you enter in the information of your workout, and it tabulates what your next workout is going to look like based on the progress that you're making and also what your current levels are looking like as far as the weight you move, the volume that you're doing. And it just creates that auto tabulation in a linear programming manner or an undulating programming manner. If you're losing weight, it'll adjust your macros appropriately. If you're not losing weight, it adjusts your macros appropriately. So a lot of the decision making and data input that trainers do could be automated with AI.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's something where if you're a trainer who can give people an in-person service, great. But in terms of online training, I think that if you can be somebody who comes up with a company that develops the AI mainframe that works into the app,
Mm-hmm.
be a billionaire and put all other online trainers out of work.
Right. And it's already being done to a certain extent, right?
Yeah.
It's being done in weightlifting. It's being done in nutrition. I think next, they're just going to get even better than the best strength and conditioning coaches in the world, right? They're going to be able to create simple, effective programs that even the best in the world can't really top. And I think that you already started to allude to this, but I don't think that this is going to have any serious impact on in-person trainers, at least in any way that I can conceive, because most people, it's not like a lack of information, right? There are so many online resources, either free or paid, that people can already go to.
Yep.
I think what most people pay for is that accountability. And I don't see, even if they put AI in a robot, I don't see us being as accountable in the foreseeable future to a robot as a human being.
To a point, no. I mean, when you go to work with a trainer, you're definitely paying for an interpersonal relationship in a lot of ways, with a workout being secondary. So I don't see that changing at all. But a trainer could utilize an AI framework to generate the program for the client to then take the client through that workout. So that's not out of the range of possibility.
Right.
Already there's a couple of companies out there that have, measurement tools for like body composition or stuff like that, where it already involves some level of AI. You can see this on Twitter and Facebook. There's bots. Bots are AI. They are a way of developing engagement on posts that learns what people are saying and then generates back input based on what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's already happening. It's just a matter of when is it going to happen in fitness and who's going to lead the charge.
So I was preparing for, it's funny that AI came up multiple times on podcasts that I was preparing for last week. I came across one guy who wrote a blog post about this chess software called, I don't know, let's call it Superstar. And it was artificial general intelligence. Are you familiar with the three levels of AI?
Not even close.
So we have artificial, I don't know, like artificial basic intelligence is the first one. I forget exactly what it's called, but basically that's where a computer, like an algorithm, can do one task better than, like 1,000 times better than any human, right? Like a calculator is AI. And it can do, what's that?
Sort of like a binary approach versus a quantum approach.
Right. And then AGI, artificial general intelligence, is when it can do a wide range of things. Mm-hmm. So like 1,000 times better. And then super intelligence is where it's like the difference between us and monkeys, or maybe even further, where they're just on a completely different, in a completely different realm, maybe. Anyway, yeah. The chess software had no idea how to play chess, and they pitted it against the top chess software in the world, like one of the Microsoft chess softwares, the computer programs, and within 4 hours, and it was like machine learning, like it learned how to play chess as it went on. Within 4 hours, it beat the other one like 28 times and lost 0, and then it tied like 78.
Yeah.
Just absolute insanity. And this was like 4 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you've ever seen the videos from, I think it's Boston Instruments or Boston Mechanical or something like that, where they have like the robotic dog that's
Yes.
able to do parkour and like learn how to open doors and stuff like that. Like that's machine learning. It's figuring out ways to get around things. So I don't see it being a stretch to be able to say like a lot of the theory based or intuitive based processes that we do as coaches and trainers can be automated.
Right.
So how do you determine macros for a client based on their weight and their progress? Boom, here's the sequence stuff that you put into the algorithm and away you go.
Right.
Does it produce results in the future, or you just set up the framework so that the computer can learn what to do and it's going to do it for you?
Yep.
So that'll make it so that a lot of trainers, if they're getting into that realm of things, can use that to automate a lot of their processes and a lot of their thoughts. But it's going to be something you can't replicate, the person-to-person interaction.
Yes. The relationship, the empathy.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you that are interested in learning more about AI, I found this absolutely fascinating. There's a website called Wait But Why with a writer named Tim Urban. And he has 2 really, really in-depth articles, blog posts on AI that will blow your effing mind. And with that, we'll move on. So just in closing, Dean, what else should up-and-coming personal trainers and strength and conditioning coaches be focusing on?
It's a tough one. I don't know what they should be focusing on, but where I always recommend people to focus on is, try to learn more about what you do and learn how to get better results for the people you're working with. I mean, it's one thing if you're working with a lot of athletes to take more athlete development courses, but if your bread's getting buttered by training 50 and 60-year-olds, stay-at-home housewives or accountants or office workers, why are you taking athletic development courses? Well, they're fun, great, that's awesome. But how are you going to help the people who are in front of you right now and paying your bills? So find better ways to service the people who are currently in front of you, knowing that that market may change down the road. If you eventually get into athletics, great. It's awesome to take the athletic development courses, but that might be 10, 20, or never years down the road. So take the courses that are going to help the biggest chunk of people that you work with on a daily basis get better results than they currently are.
Great advice, man. And then what are 1 or 2 of the most common mistakes you see young fitness professionals making today?
Probably just not being adequately prepared. So you show up for a training session either late or you're eating food from wherever, you have a coffee in your hand and you have no program prepared for that client to go through that day, or you forgot what you were doing the day before, or just not having something laid out properly. And think about it in terms of if you were on the other side of that and you were paying a trainer, and as a fitness professional, you would know what good training is and bad training, hopefully. If you showed up and the trainer was eating or drinking and not prepared properly with the program and fumbling through things, you might be a little bit ticked off. And that's not coming back to saying, well, you deserve the best all the time or whatever, or it's like silver spoon. It's just being prepared.
Mm-hmm.
If you can be prepared for each and every session coming in, it's going to make your job a lot easier, but it's also going to make sure that you can be on top of things that are going along more effectively than if you're unprepared and just putting people through workouts.
And it's simply like making this switch it's simply a choice, right? To be a professional. One of my favorite books of all time really is Turning Pro by Steven Pressfield. And it's not a single decision, right? It's a decision you have to make over and over and over, but it's a habit just like anything else. A habit of being prepared and being intentional about where you're taking people. And like you said, this is going to free up so much mental space for you and allow you to give so much more value and have a bigger impact on the people that you're working with. That's great advice, man.
The biggest thing that I would always say is know where your line of acceptable is and then raise it. What would be an acceptable workout or acceptable level of service delivery that you could offer to somebody? Now go a little bit higher. That's where you should be setting the bar.
Awesome, man. Dean, this has been great, dude. I really, really appreciate your openness to learning and just sharing everything that you've learned along the way, man. Where can people find out more about you?
If you go on Instagram, Dean Somerset 1, I have another profile, but I forgot the password, so I'm kind of locked out on it. So
Nice.
maybe that'll be an easy way for me to get verified down the line. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and if you go to my website, deansomerset.com, that's kind of where I do most of the home-based stuff.
Awesome, brother. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You bet, dude. Take care.
This episode is finished, but your training journey continues. Head over to brutestrengthraining.com/SSW and grab your free pack of 32 accessory workouts that you can incorporate into your training and start improving your strength immediately. That's brutestrengthraining.com/SSW.